What is the biggest challenge facing your organization right now? If you're like most of the leaders we speak to, I'm willing to bet that it's linked in some way to change. Change has become the red thread running through our podcast conversations recently, whether it's related to technology, global pressures, or cultural shifts. It's a constant backdrop. And so today, I'm glad that we're going to explore this topic more purposefully. Leading through change isn't just about managing projects or processes. It's about guiding people through uncertainty, sustaining trust, and building resilience. I'm delighted today to be talking with Dagmara Ptasińska to talk about what makes change so challenging, the role of HR in making it sustainable, and the skills leaders need to thrive. So, welcome to In Good Company, Dagmara. How are you today?
Thank you for having me here. I'm very well, thank you. Very curious about where our conversation will bring us.
Me too. So, thank you very much for joining us today. Thanks for giving up your time. I did a little bit of an introduction there, but for the benefit of our audience, why don't you tell us about yourself in 60 seconds?
Okay, so if I had to sum myself up in one sentence, I would say I work at the intersection of people, change, and uncomfortable questions. I spent over 17 years in HR, working in an international organizations and, of course, leading global transformation, both from the culture change to technology-driven skills shifts like HR digitalization, like shared service centers and outsourcing programs. But what really drives me isn't the process side of change, it's the human side. So I work really closely with leaders who are navigating complexity, uncertainty, and sometimes resistance by helping them build the new mindsets and, of course, not just the structures. I'm as well a certified mentor and coach, so working one-to-one with leaders and teams. And because change not only works when people actually talk to each other, and I have the privilege to support organizations across Western Europe and CE. And if there is like one thing that all of them have in common is that change is never really about systems, it's about people learning how to let go, how to adapt, and how to grow. And that's the work I love, and probably the work I will never get bored of.
Amazing. Well, I can't wait to sort of tap into your experience and wealth of knowledge in today's episode. And hopefully some of the questions, I like what you said there about uncomfortable questions. Hopefully they'll be comfortable, but who knows? We'll see. So let's ask our first one. So why do you believe leading through change is such a critical topic in the current business climate?
Because change is no longer an episode. I believe that change is the permanent operating mode of almost all of the organizations and as well in our lives. So in the past, change followed a cycle. Probably you know this, the phases like design, implementation, stabilization. But today, many organizations are implementing one transformation while already preparing for the next or doing them in the parallel. And that creates constant pressure, not just operationally, but also emotionally. And from my experience, the biggest risk is not resistant to change, which was like commonly used like, in the past, but it's rather a change fatigue. So what I can see is that people really stop believing that what they are doing has a really clear purpose. And that's when the engagement drops, in my opinion. So leading through change today for me is less about control and much more about sense making. So I mean by that, like, helping people understand why the change matters, what it means for them, and how they can really stay grounded in an uncertainty. And well, leaders who can do that build trust and resilience, but those one who can't often see great strategies fail and execution. And this is what I experience quite a lot when working with different organizations.
Yeah, I'm curious to delve deeper into that, as particularly around some of those challenges, because change, as you mentioned, is so constant. I mean, we've heard that before, that phrase. And I really liked how you articulated there about change fatigue. Moving into the challenges then that you mentioned, what would you, if you were to outline them, what would you say are the biggest challenges that organizations face when navigating that change?
So I can see a few patterns, not
Hmm.
only one. I can see repeatedly across very different organizations that, firstly, there is a huge gap between strategy of the organization and the reality. What I mean by that is that at the leadership execution level, change often makes perfect sense. So C leaders are,
Yeah.
know where they are going to and know understands it well, but it's not always translated into what it means for the teams by day-to-day work. And
Hmm.
this is what I can see, that people hear the why, and it correlates with Simon Sinek's theory, but they don't know how does it affect their work tomorrow morning. And this is for me super important. And secondly, what I will highlight is the leadership capability. So many leaders are still promoted for technical expertise, for not for the ability to lead people through the ambiguity. And when the emotions appear during change, like fear, like frustration, like uncertainty, leaders don't always feel equipped to deal with them, and this is something that we really need to work on. And the last but not least that comes to my mind is basically the organizational inconsistency. So from my experience, I see that companies talk about agility, the empowerment, the ownership, the big words, but their structures, their decision making, their reward systems remain very traditional. And this really creates confusion and undermines credibility. So I can see that people notice these contradictions very quickly.
I think it's so true. Then you picked up, and we kind of talked about this. You mentioned this earlier about change process and focusing on the human element.
Mm,
People often embrace change more when they feel like that change is happening with rather than to. I think that makes a big difference. And something else I was thinking about as you were speaking there is that I think there's often the it makes a lot of sense, like you were saying, for the C-suite and for change to happen. I think there's also another challenge to highlight there is that when change is reactive or proactive. I think
mm,
there's two things there as well, particularly with geopolitical things that are going on, or the rise in AI, as we hear a lot of. Then so there's interesting dynamics there, to be able to take your organization through that is not going to be an easy task.
oh,
Going
absolutely.
to delve more into your 15-year experience in HR, and now you're lead people and of people and culture at forgive me for getting this
Direct.
pronunciation, Lyreco in Polska. And so what role does HR play in making change sustainable rather than just a short-term fix?
Mm. So I still believe that HR plays a critical role. However, if it steps beyond being an implementation partner, rather to become a strategic architect of the change. And this is very important. So I think that HR has a unique system wide perspective. It can access organizational readiness, it can identify cultural risks, and of course highlight when change may look good on a paper but clash with an existing behavior of values. I can also see that sustainability comes from alignment. So if we want people to behave differently, systems must support that. And like, performance management, rewards, leadership expectations, learning. And here, HR is often the only function that can connect all of these elements.
Yeah.
So as well, technology must support that, and it should as well enable simplicity, transparency, speed. And
Hmm.
what I can see that when HR digitalization is done well, it reinforces the new behaviors instead of fighting them, which is commonly seen in lots of organization. So when it's done poorly, it becomes silent resistance built into the system.
Hmm.
And believe me, I've seen performance digital tools with really were really slowing people down, so they were
Yeah.
creating frustrations then quietly undermining trust in the change. So outdated processes, fragmented tools, or overly complex approval flows can really completely neutralize even when best designs transformation. And this is where HR can really make a difference, because HR people can really change decisions design. They can advocate for employee experience. They can ensure that technology supports how people are expected to work and know how the organization used to work, which is for me super important. And well, finally, HR is also key in developing leaders, and
Yeah.
it is not last, but it is like super crucial. So no transformation will really survive without leadership capability. And what was fundamentally changed in the context in which leaders operate is that the external world has become more volatile, unpredictable, emotionally demanding. You mentioned geopolitically, economically, and of course technologically, because we have AI that is like everywhere at the moment. And I can see that leaders are no longer just managing performance, but they are managing uncertainty, anxiety, and really constant disruption. And this environment, investing in leadership development, it's not about, I would say, traditional training programs. For me, it's like about helping leaders to build self awareness, emotional resilience, and maybe ability to lead away then when they don't have all of the answers. So, coaching, strong feedback culture, and really reflective leadership practices allows leaders to recognize their own reactions to pressure and change. And I believe they also stay grounded rather than reactive. There are a lot of theories about self-regulation, and this should be also applied to leadership programs. Because for me, that matters because teams take their emotional cues from their leaders. And if a leader is overwhelmed, disconnected, defensive, so the organization feels it immediately. So leadership development today is not a nice to have. I believe it's like a prerequisite for lasting change in a world that really keeps shifting faster than any transformation plan ever could, right?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose as a provider and as of that type of thing, then obviously we're going to totally agree with you there. But even if we break it down to what we talked about before, if we're defining change as the ability to support humans in going through that, then to have HR at the table feels like a no-brainer in the sense that human is within that within that title. So yes, would you say then, in your experience, that there are still cases where HR aren't being involved in change processes? Is that still the case, or do you think it's better now?
I believe it's still the case. But it depends on the organizational situations because
Yeah, of course.
probably we can discuss many examples. But I feel it's still the case.
Yeah, and I suppose that's it. So maybe if organisations are, and if there's people in a position to make a difference listening to this, that if HR aren't being involved in the change process that you're going through, then maybe now's the time to kind of introduce them, perhaps, and
Always.
and to get there, because and it makes, even just on a simple level, it makes so much sense that the HR team are going to be closer to the people within the organisation of which the change process is affecting most, and if they really want the support of employees within that organisation, it makes total sense. So there we go. Top tip number one. With moving on then to we've already kind of touched on AI and as being as a big sort of change topic. Climate change, digital transformation, and as well are reshaping organisations. How do you see leadership evolving? You touched on how it's a crucial prerequisite for organisations to develop leaders. How do you see that evolving, and what skills do you think will matter the most?
This is really interesting question. What I can see now is that leadership is clearly shifting from being about expertise to being about integration and I would say adaptability. So technical knowledge is still really important, and we know that. But today, leaders are rarely the smartest person in the room when it comes to technology, data, or HR. Right. So this is what we can see. We have a lot of Gen Z people joining organization, and they value lies in the ability to connect the dots. So between technology, people, ethics, business impact, and of course, long-term consequences. And for instance, with AI, the question is no longer just can we automate this, but should we automate this? And what does it mean for the role, skills, and trust and decision making? So in that perspective, I believe leaders need to balance innovation with responsibility, and of course, requires some kind of judgment that is not just technical understanding. And the same applies to the climate and sustainability topics. So these are no longer the CSR conversations. Leaders are just making the decisions that affect supply chains, costs, employer, brand, and of course employee values, and offer with the trade-off and no perfect solution. So what I can see as the key skills that are essentials at the moment, maybe unusual, but I'm still believing in sense making. I don't know if this is as a skill, but this is super important because for me, it's like it is the ability to really help people navigate complexity, but without oversimplifying reality. So, for instance, being honest that the future is uncertain, while still providing directions and meanings rather than false reassurance. This is what I have in mind. The second thing that crossed my mind is this learning agility. It's very popular from a couple of years, but for me, it's something like the willingness to, of course, unlearn old habits,
Yeah.
but and let go of what used to work. And still, many leaders build their careers in really stable environments, and today they must constantly adapt their leadership style, structures, and of course even sometimes identity, which is very difficult to change. Third skill that comes to my mind is emotional intelligence. So what I understand by that is that exact same change will trigger excitement in some people, for example, in myself, but as well anxiety in others. So leaders who recognize, and I would say sometimes balance or normalize this reaction, can create a lot of psychological safety instead of resistance. And resistance is like permanent trait of a change in the organization, but also as in our life. And finally, what I'm thinking about is still, I'm not sure if this is a skill, but what I mean, it's like a courage. So, in that way, that we should make the decisions without complete data, without standing by values under pressure, and sometimes slowing things down when the organization is not ready, even if the market is pushing fast.
Yeah.
Because we can really, I would say, push too much our people. And this really requires courage. And in many corporate settings, it's very difficult to see among leaders that they would like to stop finalizing the projects and taking like one additional month to push the implementation. So I think that in this AI driven world, human skills become really even more valuable than
Yeah.
usual. So trust, judgment, empathy, and I will see the ability to create psychological safety will definitely increasingly differentiate strong leaders from the average ones. And I'm sure that no algorithm can really replace it. This is, I'm really sure.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And it we've been doing quite a lot of work on these recently, and to throw a couple of other words in there for you as well, like you mentioned empathy. Another one I had was curiosity. Collaboration is another one. Listening is a really key skill that fits into everything that you've just been saying, because it's finding out what people are concerned about, what people are anxious about, and learning from that, and being able to take action from that. Courage, I thought, was a really nice thing that you mentioned there. As we include that actually as part of our leadership model, which you may have come across, which stems around noticing, deciding, and acting, and but as a byproduct of that, as a link between decision and acting, there needs to be some amount of courage, because it might be that it feels like it could be disruptive, and so yeah, I really enjoyed hearing all of those points that you made around things that are becoming more apparent that they're so important, and particularly as we are becoming more and more reliant on technology, these human skills are, as you say, something that a computer and a robot doesn't necessarily and can't necessarily do. or at least not genuinely anyway. So yeah, fascinating stuff. And I think you mentioned all of that to build trust, and I think it's clear that it can be hard to maintain that trust and engagement when change feels overwhelming for employees. So perhaps you could maybe give us a sort of a top tip, a piece of advice that leaders that are under pressure can help to deliver change. What would that advice or tip be?
The leaders under pressure. So I would say, don't try to be a hero, be a guide.
Great.
So you really don't need to have all of the answers. You really don't need to protect people from reality. What you do need is presence, as you mentioned, listening, explaining, and really staying connected when things get uncomfortable. And what I observed is that change does not fail because of lack of plans, because we have a lot of good planists, project managers. But I can see it fails because leaders disappear emotionally when pressure increases. So staying visible, I would say, and staying human is often the most really impactful leadership behavior you can demonstrate.
I love that quote. Don't be a hero, be a guide. It may even end up on the thumbnail. I just loved it, and it's so true that you're not, because otherwise it feels like you are trying to push change upon to people, and you're not necessarily doing that. You're just there to help people through it. Yeah, I think it's a really nice way to summarize I can't believe I'm about to say this, but we have reached the end of our podcast. I've been so enjoying talking to you today, and I've been really enjoying gaining the insights and knowledge of your experience in this field. So, and I'm sure a lot of our audience will have gained so much from our conversation today too. Thank you so much. It's been great to have you on board. I do have one final question for you before we let you go. Which is a bit of a chance for some sort of personal reflection, I guess, over your career. And it's a question we ask all of our guests. So to finish off, if you were given the opportunity to talk to your younger self and give yourself some advice, what would be that advice that you'd give to your younger self?
Oh, wow. I have like a list of 20. But if I would pick at least one, I would tell myself to slow down and really listen even more. Early in my career, I really relied heavily on frameworks, different kind of models, best practices. I was like, a very good student, but they are useful, but don't replace understanding the context, the culture, the people, especially when I'm working with different kind of organizations, not only with mine, but I also consult other organizations. So not every organization needs the same solution, and not every change needs to happen at maximum speed. So what I discovered is that real impact really comes from aligning ambitions with readiness. And if I had learned that earlier, some changes would have been less painful for me, that's for sure, and more sustainable.
And it's great advice. Do you think, would you say that you live by that advice now, or are there still times that?
It depends on the projects I'm in, but I'm more conscious about it. That's for sure.
Yeah, it does make such a difference. As soon as that awareness comes in, you do start changing and reapproaching things. Fabulous bit of advice there, and I think that slowing down is definitely something that's easier said than done. I think, particularly these days with constant distractions from technology and the busyness of the world. I think it's when you do find those moments of slowing down, it can be a special thing. So yeah, great piece of advice. Dagmara, thank you ever so much for giving us your time today. It's been a pleasure and a joy to have you here with me. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure for me too.
Great. So that just leaves me to say that if you'd like to find anything else about impact, then please do find all of the links that you'll need in the description of where you found today's episode. So thank you one final time to Dagmara to join me today. Thank you, Dagmara.
Thank you.
And until the next time, take care.
Hey, you're on my mind.